When you say something was ahead of its time, it's usually taken as a compliment, right? And it is. If something was ahead of its time, that means it was original, it was different, it was doing something that people loved, but most people weren't ready for. See, that's the other thing about being ahead of your time. Laserdisc was ahead of its time. Laserdisc was also a total and massive failure. But you know, commercial success doesn't always correlate with quality. And to be fair, there were some awesome things about Laserdisc, specifically when it came to video games. I mean, 2 years before the NES even existed, there was a game called Dragon's Lair, a game more beautiful than any that existed before it, a game that broke ground and helped revive the industry and eventually ended up in the Smithsonian, and a game that was released on Laserdisc. So what was Dragon's Lair? Well, it was half adventure game and half movie. It was designed by Don Bluth, one of the most talented and prolific animators of the 1980s. Dragon's Lair was like playing one of his movies, and people loved it. It was a huge hit in the arcades. And obviously, it was a prime candidate to bring to the growing console market. There was just one problem. The consoles that could run it didn't even exist yet. So instead of getting Dragon's Lair on consoles, we got stuff like Dragon's Lair for the Super Nintendo. Speaking of total and massive failures, it is perhaps one of the most vile and reprehensible things in the history of gaming that a game as genuinely important as Dragon's Lair would have its name besmirched by a game like this. Dragon's Lair on the Super Nintendo, it isn't even Dragon's Lair at all. It's a different game. And I guess that'd be fine if it were a good game, or even an okay game. This is the furthest thing from either of those things. So what happened was, Data East got their hands on this thing. They were charged with making a Super Nintendo version of Dragon's Lair. Obviously not going to happen, due to the hardware limitations. So what they did was, hey, let's make a platformer. And to be fair, it's probably a wise choice. Problem is, it's also a terrible game. Even without the name Dragon's Lair, this would be an awful platformer. And the fact that it is supposed to be Dragon's Lair, or at least in some form, makes this all the more awful. It's like a platformer designed by people who had never played a platformer. Now, at the very least, it sort of follows the same basic idea as the original. Or sort of. You're a knight trying to save a princess from a dragon. And to do that, you work your way through this huge castle. And I guess one way this game is like the original is the map. So in the arcade version, you were choosing which doors to go through, like a big maze. In this version, the castle's broken up into very short levels, some of which have several exits. So the game map sort of loops around and ties itself in knots. And actually, I guess the obvious comparison is something like Super Mario World, with all the secret exits and hidden paths. Also, that's the only thing it has in common with Super Mario World. This is, seriously, one of the worst Super Nintendo games that I've ever played. It's between this and Space Ace, which is actually another Don Bluth game that went from awesome Laserdisc game to a lousy console version. In fact, to its credit, Dragon's Lair is somehow better than Space Ace, which is saying something, given how unplayable this is. The platforming mechanics are so floaty and so broken. What's amazing is someone had to have said, alright, it's done, let's ship it. That's the most amazing thing of all! So the controls, the gameplay, just horrible. You have this huge, lanky sprite, and his jumps animate like a 5-year-old flipping pages in a notebook. Speaking of which, the presentation isn't very good either. I mean, at the very least, a Dragon's Lair game should be pretty. This is not a pretty game, and there are only like a handful of different level types that just keep repeating over and over. So the graphics, the sound, the music, it's almost as bad as the gameplay. I'd actually played Space Ace before this, but I thought, nah, there's no way it could happen again, right? There can't be another crappy Don Bluth port. Wow, was I wrong. I mean, it must have been some kind of conspiracy or something. I get that you couldn't make Dragon's Lair on consoles, but that doesn't mean you couldn't make a good version of Dragon's Lair on consoles. Dragon's Lair on the Super Nintendo is not that version. And a huge thanks to our friend Dylan from Nashville, Tennessee for sending this in. It's a really interesting story, the parallels between Dragon's Lair and Space Ace. Now that I finally played this one, the story is complete. And the ending's even worse than I thought.